Frontier Podcast.
Ever feel like just hitting the reset button on life? Like
Right.
vanishing, poof, into thin air.
It's a thought that's crossed most of our minds, I'm sure.
Right. We're diving deep into that, the how-to, the why of disappearing completely, figuring out what's real and what's fantasy about going off the grid.
It's a lot more than just running away, isn't it? Some people, they're looking for anonymity, a clean slate, a way to just start fresh. Others, they're just tired of the constant digital noise.
It's like the ultimate escape fantasy.
In a way, it is.
To guide us, we've got this stack of articles, videos, all from security experts. We've even got insights from a former CIA agent and a missing persons investigator.
Oh, wow.
Plus, we're going to look at this really intriguing concept called juhatsu.
Ah, yes, shiatsu. It's a fascinating concept. Basically, in Japan, you have individuals who just vanish from their own lives.
They just disappear.
Yeah, and it's not always about, running from something terrible, It's always like a cultural response to some of their societal pressures.
So disappearing as like a societal pressure valve.
Yeah.
Wow, I never thought about it like that.
It's wild, isn't it?
That makes you wonder about the deeper societal issues that could lead to something like this.
It's definitely a complex phenomenon, no doubt about it. But even in cultures where it's more common, it always comes with a cost. The articles we have from those who work with missing persons really stress that the biggest challenge most people face when they try to do this is the emotional toll.
It's got to be rough.
Cutting ties with loved ones, that can be absolutely devastating.
It makes sense though, right? I
Yeah.
mean, our connections, our relationships, that's what makes us human.
Yeah.
Even with the promise of a fresh start, that loss, it's got to be incredibly difficult.
Absolutely. We even came across documented cases of people who were in witness protection programs, right? And they actually ended up leaving the program despite the danger they were in and the reason they gave. They couldn't bear the pain of being cut off from their families.
That's heavy. It's a stark reminder that freedom, often, it comes with sacrifice. Okay, so let's say someone is determined to vanish. What are the practical first steps? I keep seeing this gray man theory pop up. What's that all about?
The gray man theory is all about becoming invisible.
Okay.
Not literally invisible, of course.
Right.
It's more about being unremarkable, blending in, avoiding anything that's going to make you memorable.
So no more, neon pink wigs.
Exactly. Ditch the neon pink wig. The key is to change enough to avoid creating a distinct image that's going to stick in someone's mind or get picked up by facial recognition technology. Cameras are everywhere these days.
That's true. It's like trying to disappear in a world where everyone has a high-definition camera right in their pocket.
It's true.
But even if you nail that physical transformation, there's still the digital trail we all leave behind. Deleting your Facebook, that's just scratching the surface, right?
Oh, absolutely. Your digital footprint, it goes way beyond social media. We're talking Spotify, Pinterest, even your online shopping accounts. They all create this trail of data.
It does all add up, doesn't it?
It does. And disabling location services on your phone, that's not enough either. Those phones, they can still be tracked, even when they're turned off.
It's like trying to erase your footprints on a beach after a wave just hit.
Yeah.
Every time you think you've gotten it all, another wave comes along and reveals more. What are some ways to combat that? What's the next level up from just deleting your accounts?
Encrypted messaging apps, privacy-focused browsers like Tor or VPNs. Those are your next line of defense. But, we got to be realistic here. Truly covering your tracks, that requires some serious technical knowledge.
Okay, that's where it starts to get a little over my head. What about cache? I remember reading something about that.
Cash is king when it comes to disappearing. Credit cards, even prepaid ones, they leave a trail. Cryptocurrencies, yeah, they're designed for anonymity, but even those can be traced.
So no more late-night online shopping sprees for us aspiring ghosts then.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see how much we take for granted in our digital lives.
Convenience often comes at the cost of privacy, that's for sure. But let's say you've mastered the art of digital invisibility. You've ditched the smartphone, you're only using cash, and you're a pro at navigating the dark web with Tor. Now comes the question of where to disappear to. Any ideas?
My first thought would be the wilderness, Go full Thoreau, live off the land, become one with nature. Isn't that the ultimate escape?
You'd think so, right? But actually, our sources suggest otherwise. One missing persons investigator even specifically pointed out that disappearing in a remote area can actually be counterproductive. Think about it. In those really small towns, everyone knows each other, right?
Yeah, that's true.
A new face, that's going to stick out like a sore thumb.
Interesting. So much for my Walden Pond fantasy. Okay, so if not the wilderness, then what about a bustling city? More faces, more anonymity. You're
Right. There's definitely a trade-off there. While cities, they do offer more anonymity, they also have way more surveillance. There are just more opportunities to slip up. Plus, trying to blend into a city environment, that often means leaving a digital trail, whether you mean to or not. You've got transportation passes, online food delivery, all that stuff.
Yeah, you're right. It's about finding that balance between disappearing into the crowd and not being traceable. So where is the sweet spot then? Where do the experts suggest we vanish to?
This is where it gets interesting. Several of our sources, and this includes a former CIA agent we mentioned, actually suggested smaller, more conservative cities.
Really?
Yeah, think like populations between 25,000 and 50,000.
No, that is surprising. Why those places specifically?
I know, right? It seems counterintuitive, but it makes sense when you really think about it. Those smaller cities, they often have a much stronger sense of community. People, they're less likely to pry into your business. And if you can create a believable backstory, well, you're more likely to be accepted without too much scrutiny.
It's almost like playing a part in a community theater production. You need to be convincing enough to blend in with the rest of the cast.
Exactly. And don't forget that key point from earlier. Make sure you choose a location with absolutely zero prior connections. Find a place where your past can't easily catch up to you. Now, even if you manage to find the perfect location, we have to remember that physically disappearing, that's only half the battle.
That's right. We haven't even gotten to the psychological aspect of all of this yet. Leaving everything behind, living with a new identity. I mean, that's got to mess with your head.
It does. It really does. It takes some serious mental fortitude to disappear and actually stay hidden. You're constantly on edge, always worried about being discovered. Even a tiny slip-up could ruin everything.
It's giving me anxiety just thinking about it. Is that even something you can prepare for?
That's a good question. Our expert sources really stress the importance of mental preparation. One privacy consultant, they even drew parallels to techniques for managing social anxiety, things like mindfulness, meditation, finding healthy ways to process your emotions. Those things, they become essential survival tools when you're living a life of, well, solitude.
So you're basically rewiring your brain to adapt to this new reality where you're living in the shadows. It makes you think about how important human connection really is.
It really does. And that's something that anyone considering disappearing really needs to be prepared for. The profound loneliness that often comes with it. You know, even if you manage to build a new life, true intimacy, the kind that's built on trust and shared history, that becomes incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible.
So even if you escape the life you wanted to leave behind, you're essentially trading one set of challenges for another. Instead of dealing with the pressures of your old life, now you're battling isolation and the constant fear of being found. But what about the practical side of things? How do you even begin to build a new life when you've given up all the usual tools? No more LinkedIn profile to land a job, I'm guessing.
You're catching on. Building a life off the grid means thinking differently about everything. Traditional employment, you can forget about it. Our experts, they recommended looking into cash-in-hand jobs, things like construction, farm work, cleaning services, that kind of work that doesn't require background checks or a digital footprint.
It's back to basics in a way, relying on your skills and your ability to blend in. What about finding a place to live? Do you just become a nomad, drifting from town to town?
That could be an option, sure, but it comes with a whole other set of challenges. For housing, one of the articles recommended seeking out smaller landlords, individuals rather than companies. They might be a little less likely to run extensive background checks.
That makes sense. It's all about finding those little cracks in the system where you can exist under the radar. But even if you can manage all of that, the new identity, the job, the housing, it just seems like sustaining this lifestyle would require constant vigilance. You're always looking over your shoulder, wondering if this is the day it all falls apart.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
And that brings us to a really crucial point that was emphasized through pretty much all of the materials we looked at. The unseen costs of disappearing. It's not just about the practical hurdles, but the emotional and psychological toll it takes. It's a heavy burden to carry.
It's the weight of those sacrifices, the things you just can't prepare for, that really makes you question if disappearing is ever truly worth it.
Exactly. And ultimately, it's a question that each individual has to grapple with on their own. But as one security expert put it, and I quote, "It is very, very lonely if you're going to do it."
So it really begs the question, is that price of freedom, is it worth paying if it means essentially living a life in the shadows?
It's a question with no easy answers, that's for sure. I mean, we've really walked through the motivations for it, the methods, the potential pitfalls. But Ultimately, the decision to disappear, it's deeply personal. It's a trade-off between the life you have and the freedom you're craving.
Yeah. It's easy to romanticize the idea, starting over, becoming invisible. But like we've heard from all these experts, there's a real weight to that invisibility, a loneliness that could be just incredibly difficult to bear.
And that actually brings us to a final, I think, thought-provoking point that was kind of woven throughout all the materials we explored. In a world that's so obsessed with connectivity, true anonymity, it's become a really precious and increasingly rare commodity.
It's almost paradoxical, isn't it? As technology makes us more connected than ever, the ability to disconnect, to disappear completely, becomes even more desirable.
It's like this pendulum swinging back and forth between two extremes. And whether you're actually considering like a full-on vanishing act, or you just want to reclaim a little bit of your digital privacy, understanding how to navigate that pendulum, it's absolutely crucial.
So, as you go about your day-to-day, maybe think twice before you share that personal anecdote online, or before you just automatically hit accept on those cookie requests.
Yay.
Because every little bit of information you put out there, it chips away at that anonymity.
It all goes back to being mindful of that digital footprint of yours, understanding that even those little seemingly insignificant data points, they can actually contribute to a much bigger picture.
It's like that old saying, you get just one chance to make a first impression. But now it's not just about how you present yourself, in person. It's about the digital you that's out there existing in the cloud.
Exactly. And that digital you, more often than not, it's far more permanent and far more revealing than we realize.
So maybe, just maybe, the real takeaway from our deep dive into the world of disappearing, it isn't about actually learning how to vanish completely.
Artificial Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Podcast.